Temi stood in the middle of the living room, heart pounding, as his elder brother, dressed in expensive clothes, pointed at the door and shouted, "Leave! There's no space here for poor people." Temi looked around, confused and hurt. His other siblings didn't say a word. They just nodded, agreeing silently, one by one. It was the same house their late father had built for the whole family, the same place where they all grew up. But now, just because Temi had lost his job, they were acting like he didn't belong. His wife, Casey, who was heavily pregnant, stood beside him, tears filling her eyes. Then, his sister stepped forward with a cold look on her face. "You were never really one of us," she said sharply, her voice cutting deeper than a knife. Temi wanted to speak, to fight back, but the pain was too heavy. Without another word, he took Kessie's hand, and they walked out of the house. The rain pouring down like the sky itself was crying for them. Outside, the cold rain soaked them completely. They had nowhere to go. Temi looked at his shivering wife, her hand resting on her baby bump, her lips trembling. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were full of questions and fear. Temi held her hands tightly, brought her close, and looked into her eyes. "Casey," he said softly, with all the strength left in him, "I promise you, I will never let you cry like this again." His words weren't loud, but they were powerful. In that painful moment, standing in the rain with nothing but each other, something strong was born. A new fire inside him. He had lost everything, his job, his home, even his family. But he still had Casey, and with her by his side, he knew he could rebuild. No matter how hard the road ahead would be, Temi had made up his mind. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Temi and Casey left the city with nothing but a small bag and each other. After days of walking and asking around, they found a tiny village just outside Osun. An old woman there gave them a small hut to stay in. It had only one room. The roof leaked when it rained. The floor was bare mud. There was no bed, no electricity, and no comfort. But it was better than sleeping outside. And the people? They were kind. They didn't have much, but they shared smiles, greetings, and sometimes even food. It wasn't the mansion Temi had grown up in, but it had something his rich siblings had lost: humanity. Some of the village elders remembered Temi's father. They spoke of how generous and good-hearted he had been. "Your father helped us when times were hard," they said. But now, all that was left of his name was a memory. There was no inheritance, no support, no money, just stories. But Temi and Casey listened to those stories like they were gold. It reminded them of the kind of people they wanted to be. Every day, Temi woke up early and walked from village to village, asking for any job. He was not ashamed to carry firewood, wash cars, or clear land. He didn't care about what people would say. He only cared about feeding Casey and their unborn child. Sometimes, he came home with only a few naira. Sometimes, with nothing at all. But Casey never complained. She would smile, hold his hand, and say, "We will be fine." Casey also worked hard. With a needle and thread, she started stitching old clothes for villagers, fixing tiers, and even designing simple wrappers for women. Slowly, word spread, and people started bringing more work. She would sit by the small window of their hut, her fingers moving fast, her eyes filled with quiet strength. One night, while they sat together outside their hut, the moonlight shining down, Casey looked tired. Her hands were sore. Temi looked at her and said, "We're not starting over." She turned to him, confused. He smiled and added, "We're starting something new." That moment was small, but powerful. They were no longer thinking about what they had lost. They were now focused on what they could build together. Their hut may have had mud walls, but their dreams had strong foundations. One hot afternoon, Temi was helping a neighbor fix a broken wooden fence at the edge of the village. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were full of splinters. Just as he was tying the last piece of rope, he heard the sound of a car struggling nearby. Curious, he dropped what he was doing and ran towards the noise. A black SUV was stuck deep in the muddy village road. The tires kept spinning, splashing dirt everywhere, but the car wouldn't move. Inside the car was an elderly man, dressed in fine native wear, but clearly frustrated. Many people passed by, shaking their heads, but no one offered help. Without thinking twice, Temi grabbed a wooden plank and started digging around the tires. He asked some boys nearby to help push. With teamwork, The car finally moved out of the mud. The old man stepped out and looked closely at Temi. "You didn't ask who I was," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You just helped." Temi simply smiled and replied, "You needed help. That's all I saw." The man chuckled. "What's your name?" "Temi," he said, "and this is my village now." That old man was Chief Bayo, a quiet but powerful investor who put money behind young tech businesses all over Nigeria. He had come to the village for a family event, but had gotten lost on the bad road. Chief Bayo watched Temi closely. He saw the way he spoke clearly, the way he thought before answering, the way he had ideas even while pushing a car. Later that evening, Chief Bayo sent a message to Temi through a local elder. He wanted to see him again. At their next meeting, Chief Bayo didn't offer money or a job. Instead, he said something Temi would never forget. "Brains without pride go far. You have both humility and potential. I want to teach you." Temi was shocked. No one had ever seen anything in him since he lost everything. He didn't know much about tech or business, but he was willing to learn. He agreed to the mentorship. From that day, Temi's life began to change. Not fast, not loudly, but deeply. What started as a simple act of kindness on a muddy road became the first step toward a future even Temi couldn't imagine yet. Temi's journey into the business world was not smooth. It was full of late nights, early mornings, and many moments of doubt. After Chief Bayo took him under his wing, Temi began learning about things he had never heard of before: investment, coding, and how to move goods from one place to another, called logistics. These were big words to him at first, but he didn't give up. Every day, while others in the village were asleep, he stayed awake with a small lantern, reading, taking notes, and watching videos on a borrowed phone. He made many mistakes, but he never stopped learning. Casey, his wife, was his biggest support. She never complained. While Temi studied, she cooked, sewed clothes to bring in money, edited his business proposals when he got stuck, and always encouraged him when he felt like quitting. Sometimes they fought, not out of hate, but out of stress and tiredness. They were both exhausted, hungry, and struggling. But through all the pressure, they held each other and kept going. Temi tried 3 different business ideas. The first one failed after just 2 weeks. The second looked promising, but collapsed due to bad internet service in the village. The third one almost worked, but they ran out of money halfway. Each time, they cried together, picked themselves up, and started again. People in the village started calling him the dreamer, some with respect, others with laughter. But then came the 4th idea. It was something close to their hearts. They created a simple app that helped connect village farmers directly to buyers in the city. Before this app, many farmers had to sell their crops cheaply to middlemen who made all the profit. With the app, farmers could now speak to buyers, agree on fair prices, and deliver goods directly. At first, only a few people used it, but soon, word spread. More farmers joined, then local buyers, then market leaders. Within 2 years, they got attention from big investors. People were shocked that such a useful idea came from a small village. They received funding to expand. They hired people. They grew fast. And by the 5th year, their small dream had become a company worth millions. Temi and Kessie looked at each other one evening and smiled. They remembered the leaking roof, the empty pots, the painful failures. But now, all that pain had led to this moment. Their win was not just about money, it was proof that they never gave up. Temi's company, Oro Farms, started growing so fast that people across the country began talking about it. Farmers loved it because it helped them sell their crops directly to buyers without being cheated. Buyers loved it because they got fresh food at better prices. The app became popular, and soon, big shops, hotels, and even exporters started using it. Oro Farms became a national name, known everywhere from Lagos to Kano. But even as the business grew and the money came in, Temi didn't change who he was. While other company owners wore fancy suits and gold watches, Temi still wore his simple clothes and old slippers to meetings. People were surprised to see a man worth millions entering a boardroom in slippers. But he didn't care. He believed his work and his values were more important than showing off. Temi used his success to give back. He remembered how hard life was in the village. So, he built schools for children who walked miles to learn under trees. He repaired broken roads so that farmers could carry their goods safely. He set up small health centers where mothers could take their babies and not worry about money. He didn't put his face on banners or ask for praise. He just helped quietly, with a full heart. What most people didn't know was that this man, who now owned a big business, once slept on a thin mat with his pregnant wife in a leaking room. They didn't know about the nights he studied by candlelight, or how he failed 3 times before finally getting it right. All they saw now was the success. But Temi never forgot his journey. One day, a popular international magazine called Forbes wrote a story about him. They titled it, "The Humble Billionaire." The article spoke about how he built a company from a small village and how he still lived simply, helped others, and never let money change his heart. That article went viral. People were inspired by him. Some called him a role model. And then, something unexpected happened. Temi's phone started ringing. Messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. His siblings, the same ones who kicked him out of the mansion, were now trying to reach him. They were the same people who once said he didn't belong in their world. Now, they wanted to talk. But Temi didn't rush to reply. He just looked at the phone, calm and silent, remembering everything. One evening, Temi received a message from his eldest brother, the same brother who once told him to leave the mansion because he was poor. This time, his voice was shaky, full of fear. The mansion, their late father's house, the same one that held their childhood memories, was now at risk of being taken by the bank. They had taken loans they couldn't repay, made bad investments, and now everything was falling apart. "We didn't know things would turn out like this," his brother said. "Please, we can't lose our legacy." The rest of his siblings joined in. The same people who once mocked him, who watched in silence as he walked out in the rain with his pregnant wife, were now begging him to help save the house. They called it their father's legacy. But to Temi, that legacy was more than a building. Temi didn't say a word. He listened quietly, not with anger, but with calmness. He had waited years for this moment, not to take revenge, but to see how life changes. He didn't answer them right away. He didn't send money. He didn't shout. He just made one decision. He would visit the mansion, but not for them, not to rescue them or prove anything. He had something else in mind, something much bigger than their past fights. He remembered how that house was once filled with laughter, how their father helped neighbors, how people came for advice, support, and hope. That house was more than walls and marble floors. It had once meant something to the whole community, but now it had become a place of pride, greed, and cold hearts. Temi booked the visit not to save it for his brothers and sisters, but to turn it into something better, something that would serve others, just like their father would have wanted. He had no interest in living there again or showing off his wealth. He had moved on, but if he was going to help, it would be on his terms, for a purpose that touched lives. As he stood by the window that night, looking at the stars with Casey by his side, he whispered, "Let's do something meaningful." And just like that, the story began to shift, not from riches to riches, but from pain to purpose. The big iron gates of the mansion slowly opened. A black convoy of cars rolled in quietly, but with power. Everyone in the compound stopped what they were doing. The maids whispered to each other in shock. Some dropped what they were holding. The siblings came rushing out, their eyes wide, mouths open. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Temi stepped out of the car first. He wore a clean, simple agbada, not loud, not flashy, but rich in presence. There was no gold chain on his neck, no fancy watch on his wrist. But the way he carried himself, calm and confident, said everything. He didn't need to show off. His success spoke for itself. Then Casey stepped out beside him. Her belly showed she was pregnant again, but her face looked like peace. She wore a soft smile, not proud, not bitter, just pure and warm. She held his arm gently, like a queen walking beside her king. Everyone around watched in silence. The same people who once told them to leave with nothing were now standing still, unsure of what to say. Their mouths moved, but no words came out. Temi looked at them one by one. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult them. He simply said, "We came in to forgive." His voice was calm, but the words hit deep. Forgive, not for what they deserved, but because he had grown past it. Then he added, "Not to beg, never again." And that moment was powerful. His siblings felt it. The shame, the surprise, the truth. He had returned not as the poor man they once kicked out, but as a man full of purpose and strength. And yet, he came with no anger, no revenge, just peace. That day, the mansion felt different. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, about growth, and about letting go of the past. Temi didn't need the house. He had already built something greater with Kesi, but he chose to come back, not to prove anything, but to show that real power is in forgiveness, and real wealth is peace. And though no one clapped, no one cheered, in their hearts they knew the boy they once threw out had become a man the world now admired. They all sat around the long family dining table, just like old times, but everything felt different now. His siblings were smiling, trying hard to act like nothing had happened in the past. They laughed at jokes that weren't funny, complimented Kesi's dress, and acted as if they had always supported Temi. But Temi could feel the fakeness in the air. He looked at each of them calmly, then gently placed his hand on the table to speak. "When you pushed us out of this house," he said softly, "we felt broken. We had nothing but pain, no place to go, and no hand reaching out to help. But we found something better than comfort. We found purpose." His voice didn't rise. He didn't accuse or blame. He just told the truth. He glanced at Kesi, who smiled back at him with pride. Then he looked back at his brothers and sisters. "We didn't just survive. We grew. We didn't just rise. We brought other people with us. The poor, the forgotten, the ones no one saw. We helped them stand too." The room went quiet. Temi reached into his folder and pulled out a single document. He slid it across the table toward his eldest brother. "This," he said, "is a land transfer. I just bought the land behind this mansion. We're building a free skills center there. Tailoring, farming, tech. Anyone in the community can come learn and grow." His siblings looked confused. "This house was once full of pride and rejection," Temi continued, "but the space behind it will now give hope to those who need it most." They stared at the paper in silence. No one knew what to say. "You once called us poor," Temi added gently, "but we built gold from that poverty. It wasn't gold you could wear. It wasn't flashy cars or shiny shoes. It was the gold of helping others, of changing lives, of rising with dignity." His siblings now saw the truth. Temi had something far greater than what they ever had. That day, they didn't just see Temi as the little brother they once ignored. They saw a leader, a builder, a man who turned pain into power and used it to light the path for others, and none of them could deny it. The richest man at the table wasn't the one with the biggest house, but the one with the biggest heart. Tears rolled down the faces of Temi's siblings as they sat in silence. Their eyes were red, not just from crying, but from the deep guilt that now weighed heavy on their hearts. They remembered how they mocked him, how they pushed him and his pregnant wife out into the rain like strangers. They had power back then, and they used it to shame him. Now the tables had turned. Temi had everything: success, peace, and respect. But instead of punishing them, he stood before them with kindness in his heart. They didn't cry because they were ashamed of being caught. They cried because they knew Temi had every right to treat them the same way they treated him. And yet, he didn't. He chose a higher road. He chose to show them the kind of heart they never had. Casey, sitting quietly beside him, leaned in and whispered, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom." Temi nodded and stood up slowly. He looked around at each of his brothers and sisters. They couldn't even look him in the eyes. "I didn't come here to compete with you," he said gently. "I came to remind you of who I truly am. I'm not your enemy. I'm your brother." His voice was calm, full of peace. He wasn't there to brag about his success. He wasn't there to show off his money. He was there to show them something more powerful, the strength of forgiveness. "You see," he continued, "life gave me two choices, to become bitter or to become better. And I chose better." His siblings wept harder now, not just from guilt, but from a deep realization. They had lost so much more than money. They had lost the love and trust of someone who once looked up to them. And now, that same person was showing them grace. Temi walked toward the door, holding Casey's hand. But before he left, he turned back and said one last thing. "I'm not here to live in the past. I came to build the future. You can join me or stay behind." Then he walked out, leaving behind not anger, but a powerful message. Forgiveness is stronger than revenge. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give those who hurt you is showing them what true strength looks like. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and pride, had transformed into something completely different. It was no longer just a house of luxury. It had become a sanctuary, a place where children, who had nowhere else to go, found safety and love. The The gates of the once grand home now stood as a welcoming embrace, bearing a golden plaque that read, "From rejection to restoration, in honor of second chances." Tammy would visit often, but not as the powerful businessman everyone knew him as. No, he visited as a man who had walked a path of struggle, someone who had known rejection and hardship. He never forgot those long, painful nights when he had nothing but his faith and his wife by his side. He had come from nothing, and yet he had built something beautiful. His visits weren't filled with grand speeches or displays of wealth. Instead, he walked through the halls of Oro House with quiet grace. He would sit with the children, listen to their stories, and offer them the kind of wisdom that only someone who had been through the storm could give. The children who once had no hope now had a future, and they could feel the warmth of the love he had poured into the foundation. Temi had returned to the mansion, but not with revenge in his heart. He had come back with something much more powerful, royalty in his soul. He had learned that true power wasn't about wealth or status. It was about lifting others up, helping those who couldn't help themselves, and showing kindness where others had shown cruelty. And so, every time he walked through the gates of Oro House, Temi was reminded of how far he had come. He was no longer the man who had been rejected. He was the man who had turned that rejection into something beautiful, something that would help generations to come. The mansion, once a symbol of pride, had now become a beacon of hope, where children slept soundly, knowing that no matter how dark their past was, their future could be bright. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Tag a friend who believes in second chances. Comment, "Rise," if you know rejection isn't the end, and follow for more real, powerful stories that prove your pain can become your purpose.